The rain did wash the smell away. It only seemed to press it down closer to the asphalt, trapping it against the metal skin of the cab like a physical weight. Elias sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling with a low, rhythmic shudder that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. He watched the loader through his side mirror, a dark, spindly silhouette operating the hydraulic claw that dropped a final heap of cargo into the open-top trailer. It wasn't a clean sound. It was a dull, wet clatter of calcium striking aluminum. 20 tons of cattle bones, stripped, boiled, and aged, heading for the gelatin factory in Nevada. Elias reached for the window crank and rolled the glass up the last inch, trying to seal off the cab, but the air inside was already tainted. It smelled of old earth, wet copper, and something sweeter, something cloying that stuck to the back of the throat. He picked up his logbook, the paper damp under his fingertips. It was 11 p.m. He had 600 miles of empty high desert highway ahead of him before he could drop this load and scrub his hands with industrial bleach. The claw retracted, swinging away under the harsh floodlights of the rendering yard. Elias signaled the operator with a quick flash of his high beams. The operator didn't wave back. They never did at this place. It was a graveyard of parts, a place where the grandeur of livestock was reduced to piles of white rubble. Elias opened the door. The humidity hit him instantly, carrying the scent of the wet boneyard. He stepped down onto the running board and then to the gravel, his boots crunching loudly in the quiet lull between the rain showers. He moved the side of the trailer to secure the tarp. The floodlights hummed overhead, a sound that seemed to bore into his teeth, casting long, jittery shadows across the wet ground that stretched and contracted with the wind. He grabbed the first bungee cord, hooking it into the grommet of the heavy vinyl tarp. He pulled down hard, using his body weight to stretch the rubber toward the rail hook. As his fingers brushed the metal of the trailer wall, a static shock, violent and sharp, snapped against the skin. It wasn't the usual static of a dry winter day. This was a thick, biting discharge that numbed his hand up to the elbow. Elias recoiled, shaking his hand, hissing through his teeth. He looked at his fingertips, half expecting to see burns. Nothing, just the dull ache of the nerves misfiring. He looked up at the tarp. It was undulating. The vinyl was rippling as the bones settled underneath. That was normal. Gravity did that. Physics did that. The load was essentially a pile of loose puzzle pieces. They would shift until they found their equilibrium, but then the movement stopped abruptly. It didn't taper off. It simply froze, as if the cargo had suddenly become a single, solid block. The hair on Elias's arm stood up beneath his flannel shirt. He stood there for a moment, the rain beginning to spit again, cold and sharp against his neck. He walked the length of the trailer, checking the tires, needing the routine to settle his nerves. He paused at the second axle. A sound came from inside the trailer, just on the other side of the aluminum wall, inches from his face. It was a slow, deliberate scrape, like something heavy dragging itself over a pile of dry ceramics. It started high near the front and slid down toward the floor of the bed. Elias stepped back, his hand instinctively going to the tire thumper hanging on his belt loop. He waited. Only the hum of the yard lights and the rhythmic patter of rain on the tarp answered. Settling, he muttered. The word felt small in the open air. Just gravity. He finished strapping the load, moving faster now, his movements jerky. He didn't look at the tarp again. He climbed back into the cab, the sanctuary of the workspace, and locked the doors. He fired up the engine. The diesel roared, drowning out the quiet dread of the yard. He released the parking brake, the hiss of air sharp and final. The truck felt heavy, heavier than 20 tons. As he let out the clutch, the engine whined in a lower register than usual, straining against the inertia. It felt as though the tires were glued to the mud. Elias frowned, checking his gauges. Air pressure was optimal, oil temp stable. He gave it more throttle, and the rig lurched forward, pulling out onto the blacktop, the lights of the rendering plant fading quickly in his rear-view mirror until they were just pinpricks in the darkness. 2 hours in, and the isolation was absolute. The interstate was a ribbon of gray cutting through a void of black. There was no moon, only the heavy cloud cover that swallowed the starlight. The high beams cut a cone of visibility ahead, illuminating nothing but the wet asphalt and the occasional flash of a mile marker. Elias had the radio on low. It was a talk show discussing local zoning laws in a county 3 states away. It was boring, dry, and exactly what he needed. Just a human voice to remind him that the world existed outside of this cab. But the truck was fighting him. He could feel in the steering wheel a subtle resistance, a drift to the right that hadn't been there when he started to shift. He corrected, pulling the wheel left. The truck responded sluggishly. It felt like he was towing a liquid load, a tanker full of milk or water, where the surge of the liquid pushes and pulls against the momentum. But bones were solid. They shouldn't surge. They shouldn't shift unless he hit a hard corner, and the road here was straight as an arrow. He shifted in his seat, his lower back aching. He reached for his thermos of coffee in the cup holder. As his hand closed around the steel cylinder, he froze. From the back, through the sleeper berth curtain, through the insulated cab wall, and coming from the trailer couple behind him, he heard it. Thump, pause, thump, pause, thump. It wasn't the mechanical clank of a loose chain or the rattle of a spare tire carrier. It was soft, padded. It sounded like footsteps. It sounded like someone pacing the length of the trailer, walking on top of the shifting pile of bones. Elias gripped the wheel with both hands, his knuckles turning white. He checked his side mirrors. The trailer was a dark monolith behind him, blotting out the world. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy, clinging mist that swirled in the red glow of his tail lights. In the right convex mirror, he saw something flutter. He squinted, leaning forward. The tarp near the back corner. It looked loose. It was flapping in the wind, a rhythmic snapping motion. "Damn it," he whispered. If the tarp flew off, the fine from the DOT would be substantial. Worse, if he spilled bones on the interstate, he'd lose his license. It was the only explanation for the noise. A loose strap banging against a hollow metal wall of the trailer. That's what the thumping was. Just wind and loose rubber. He spotted a gravel turnout a mile ahead, a dark patch on the side of the highway meant for emergency stops. He hit the indicators. The clicking sound loud in the cabin. The truck groaned as he applied the brakes, the deceleration shuddering through the chassis more violently than usual, as if the momentum of the load didn't want to stop. He pulled over, the gravel crunching loudly under the 18 wheels. The rig came to a halt. Elias sat for a moment, listening. The engine idle was the only sound. The thumping had stopped. He grabbed his heavy maglite flashlight from the door pocket and zipped up his jacket. He opened the door and stepped out into the silence. The air was freezing, much colder than it should have been for late spring. It was a dead, dry cold that seemed to radiate from the ground up. Elias walked to the back of the trailer, the flashlight beam cutting through the mist like a solid bar of light. He reached the back corner. The tarp was tight, perfectly secure. He frowned, shining the beam over the hooks. Not a single bungee cord was loose. The rubber was taut, stretched to its limit. There was no way this tarp had been flapping. The tension was perfect. "My mind," he whispered, rubbing his eyes. Just tired. He turned to head back to the cab, eager for the heater. Click. The sound was distinct. It came from the top of the trailer. It was a sound of two dry, hollow objects being knocked together. Elias stopped. He spun around, shining the light up the side of the trailer wall. "Who's up there?" he shouted. His voice cracked slightly, swallowed instantly by the vast desert silence. Nothing. He moved to the small metal ladder, welded to the front of the trailer. He didn't want to go up there. Every instinct in his body, a primal alarm system inherited from ancestors who feared the dark, was screaming at him to get in the truck and drive. But he was a professional. He couldn't drive with a stowaway or a shifting load. He put a boot on the bottom rung. The metal was icy. He pulled himself up, the flashlight clenched in his teeth. He climbed until his eyes were level with the top rail. He reached out and unhooked a corner of the tarp, peeling back the heavy vinyl just enough to shine the light inside. The beam cut across the uneven landscape of the payload. It was a chaotic sea of white and beige. Thousands of bleached fragments, ribs, vertebrae, femurs, all interlocked in a rigid, dusty puzzle. In the center of the pile, directly in the middle of the trailer, there was a depression. It was a hollowed-out space, smooth and circular, about 3 feet wide. It looked like a nest, or as if something heavy, had been sitting there, curled up. Elias stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. The bones around the depression were undisturbed. There were no footprints leading to it, no slide marks from where a person might have crawled. Just that perfect, impossible indentation in the center of the calcium sea. As he watched, paralyzed by a fear he couldn't name, a single rib bone at the edge of the depression moved. It didn't fall. It didn't settle. It slid. It slid slowly, deliberately, down the slope of the pile and into the center of the nest. It moved against the angle of the pile, as if pulled by a magnet. The flashlight flickered. Elias didn't wait. He dropped from the ladder, landing hard on the gravel and nearly twisting his ankle. He scrambled toward the cab, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic rhythm that echoed the thumping he had heard earlier. He threw the door open, climbed in, and slammed it shut, locking it instantly. He turned the key. The engine hesitated. It cranked once, twice, a slow, dying groan. "Come on," Elias pleaded, his hands shaking so hard he could barely grip the wheel. "Don't do this." The engine turned over again, caught and roared to life. Elias didn't check his mirrors. He slammed the truck into gear and peeled out onto the highway, the gravel spraying behind him. As he reached cruising speed, his chest heaving, he glanced at the passenger seat. The leather cushion was depressed. It was pressed down just slightly in the center, as if a weight had just settled onto it. Elias looked away, staring straight ahead. "Road's uneven," he said aloud. "Suspension is stiff." He reached for the heater dial and cranked it to the maximum. He was shivering violently. The air in the cab, previously warm from the engine, was now frigid. He could see his breath foggy in the air, small white puffs dissipating against the windshield. The final 100 miles were a blur of white-knuckle tension. Elias didn't look at the passenger seat again. He refused to. He kept his peripheral vision strictly on the road and the side mirrors. He counted the white lines. He counted the seconds. The truck felt impossible to control now. It was swaying with momentum that defied the physics of the road, pulling against the curves as if the cargo was shifting aggressively from side to side, throwing its weight around. He had to fight the wheel to keep the rig in the lane. He felt eyes on him. It wasn't a melodramatic feeling. It was the biological sensation of being observed. The way the skin on the back of your neck prickles when someone enters a room behind you. But the sensation was coming from his right, from the passenger seat. He turned up the radio, but the static was getting worse. The talk show had dissolved into a hiss of white noise that rose and fell in intensity. Hungry, Elias slammed on the brakes, the tires chirping on the asphalt. The word had come through the static. Or had it? It was a whisper, buried under the electronic fuzz. "No," Elias said. "Signal interference. Just interference." He kept driving. He was exhausted. That was it. Carbon monoxide leak, maybe? He cracked a window. The rushing wind roared in, deafening and cold, but it didn't clear his head. He saw the lights of the way station ahead. The open sign was a neon beacon of bureaucracy and safety. He needed to be around people. He needed bright lights and tedious paperwork. He needed reality to reassert itself. He pulled into the way station lane, the brakes hissing loudly as he downshifted. The truck shuddered as it came to a stop on the massive platform scale. The window of the station booth slid open. The station master was an older man with a gray beard and a ball cap, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his computer monitors. "Morning, Elias," the man said, his voice tinny through the intercom speaker. "Rough night." "You have no idea," Elias breathed, wiping cold sweat from his forehead. He kept his hands on the wheel, afraid that if he let go, he wouldn't be able to stop shaking. "Just get me the slip, so I can dump this. Please." The station master frowned. He tapped his screen, then adjusted his glasses. He looked out at the truck, then back at the screen. "Something's off, son," the master said. "What?" Elias snapped. "Paperwork is clean. Seals are intact. Your bill of lading says 20 tons. 40,000 pounds of cargo. Standard load." "Yeah," Elias said, "plus the rig weight. Should be 75,000 gross." "Scale is reading 82,000, the master said. Elias went cold. The blood drained from his face. "That's impossible. I watched them load it. The truck is sealed. I haven't stopped, not really. Scale don't lie, Elias. You're 7,000 pounds over. That's a massive fine. Did you pick up a hitchhiker? Double load." "No," Elias whispered. "Just bones." "Pull it forward," the master commanded, his voice losing its friendliness. "Let me zero it out and back it up again. Maybe the sensors are frozen." Elias did as he was told. He pulled the truck off the pad. He waited for the green light, then reversed back onto the scale. The truck groaned as the brakes locked. He looked at the booth. The station master was staring at the screen. His mouth hung slightly open. He tapped the monitor, then stood up and looked out the window at Elias's truck. "What is it?" Elias asked, leaning toward the window. "It dropped," the master said, his voice barely audible over the idling engine. "What?" "It's reading 75,000 now. Exact. To the pound." "Maybe the scale is sticky," Elias said. He wanted to believe it. He needed to believe it. "Elias," the master said. He pointed a trembling finger at the trailer. "The scale didn't just change between ways. I was watching the digital readout while you were sitting there just now. I watched the numbers roll down. Fast." The master swallowed hard. "It was like 7,000 pounds of weight just stepped off the truck while you were stopped." Elias looked at the passenger side mirror. The mist was thick here, illuminated by the station's floodlights, swirling around the rear tires. For a second, just a fraction of a second, the mist seemed to displace. It formed a negative space. A tall, thin shape standing on the asphalt next to the rear axle, watching. The passenger door of the truck clicked. It was the sound of the lock disengaging. Elias whipped his head around. The lock plunger was up. The door was unlocked. He had locked it. He remembered locking it. "Open the gate," Elias said. His voice was hard, unrecognizable to his own ears. "I'm leaving." "You need your ticket," the master started. "Keep it." Elias slammed the truck into gear. He didn't care about the fine. He didn't care about the logbook. He floored the accelerator, the engine screaming as he bypassed the parking area and merged back onto the highway. He drove the final 10 miles to the rendering plant without blinking. He drove with the cabin light on. He drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand gripping the tire thumper. When he finally reached the plant, he backed into bay with aggressive speed. He engaged the hydraulics to dump the load. The trailer began to rise. He didn't get out to check the gate. He didn't get out to watch. He watched through the rear window as the bones slid out, a cascading avalanche of white tumbling into the grinder pit. As the last of the cargo slid free, the truck sprang up on its suspension, light and buoyant. The heavy, dragging sensation was gone instantly. Elias lowered the bed. He signed the paperwork with the night foreman without making eye contact, his hand scratching a jagged signature. "You look like hell, Elias," the foreman said, chewing on a toothpick. "See a ghost?" Elias didn't answer. He climbed back into his cab. He sat there for a moment before starting the engine. He reached over to the passenger seat. He placed his hand on the leather. It was freezing, not cold from the ambient air, but an unnatural, biting cold that stung his palm. And there, in the center of the seat, the leather was slowly, very slowly, rising back up, erasing the depression of a heavy weight that was no longer there. Elias put the truck in gear and drove toward the sunrise, but he kept the heater on full blast. He knew he would never be warm again.